Hello friends and welcome to a new video. If you're new around here, my name is Katie and on this channel I make videos about my journey as an artist and everything that I'm learning along the way running my little art shop called Fun Gal Studio. This video is my attempt at making the video that I wish existed when I first started making greeting cards. There is so much to consider, including what paper to use, what envelopes to use, what size to make them, what to price them at, and it's just a whole world that is really daunting to get into. My hope is that this video, whether you're brand new to card making or you've already been doing it for a while and you want some new fresh ideas, hopefully this is helpful for you. So first things first, there are a couple of things that I think are really important to talk about. Greeting cards come a dime a dozen. You can find them almost anywhere, cheaply manufactured, mass manufactured. For us as greeting card crafters who are making handmade cards, you have to price your cards fairly for the work that you put into them and what it costs you to make them. And because of that, it's really important to step back and make sure that your cards have something unique to offer that's going to make them stand out. Find a way through your cards to express your personal taste and style and interests. For me, my greeting cards lately have included a lot of cheeky animal puns. I use my typical warm, earthy, neutral color palette so my customers know what to expect from me. Although at the same time, I'm always kind of branching out and trying new things to experiment with what speaks to me and what I think will speak to other people. So at the end of the day, if you're going to be making handmade greeting cards, make sure that you're making them with heart and that they're authentic to you, because that's what's going to speak to people and make them motivated to purchase your card over one that they can get at the dollar store. I generally use Procreate to design my greeting cards, although sometimes I start with something that I've created using traditional mediums and scan it and work with it in Photoshop and then turn that into a card. Something important to consider before you start the design process is knowing what size your cards are going to be. So for me, I make all of my card designs 4.25 by 5.5 inches. This is because it's the exact size of 1/4 of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, which means that I can fit exactly two 4.25 by 5.5 cards on one sheet once they're folded in half. Before you start designing your cards though, you do want to make sure that if you're going to go with that size, your printer has to be able to print borderlessly. This is because to get that size, you have to be able to print all the way to the edge of your 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. If your printer can't handle that, you might need to make your cards a slightly smaller size, or you could do a larger card where you just cut off the edges and make one card per sheet of paper. We've already talked a little bit about the importance of making sure whatever you're putting on your cards is really personal, unique, and authentic, but something you also might want to consider is what's on the back of the card. On the back of a greeting card, there's usually a logo or some information about the card maker, whether you're buying it from an indie artist or from somewhere like Hallmark. On the back of my cards, I have my business logo, and I'm thinking about adding my website as well so that I'm easier to find if someone receives one of my cards and wants to know who designed it. You can generally put whatever you like on the back of your card. I personally think that it's better to keep this simple because you want it to be very clear what's the front and what's the back of the card. So I keep the back page blank except for the bottom where I have my little logo and information down there. Something that I don't do, but a lot of people probably do, and I actually get asked for a lot, is doing designs on the insides of cards. That is something that I might branch into eventually, but for the time being, I'm just sticking to a card that has a design on the front and is blank on the inside. I do this for a few reasons. For one thing, it's a whole other level of design to be thinking of what's going to go on the front and what's going to go on the inside of the card. Also, printing double-sided creates a whole new level of issues with printing that you might run into, so it's just something I haven't worked on myself yet, but it is absolutely an option. So once you have your design for your card, the front and the back and maybe the inside, you're going to need to use some kind of design software. I use Photoshop. I'm not really familiar with any other options, but I'm sure there are some good ones. So for me and my cards, what I do is I create a document that's 8.5 by 11, and I set up my designs on the right half of the page, each taking up 1/4 of the page, and then the backing of the card on the left-hand side of the page, so that when you print it out, you've got two cards stacked on top of each other on one piece of paper. One thing that is super important to consider when you're laying out the elements of your card is that you're accounting for bleed. So essentially, your computer and your printer don't communicate perfectly, and sometimes there's a little bit of, you're missing a bit of your edges when you print your document onto your printer. So basically what I do to account for that is to shrink down what I'm printing a little bit smaller so that if the edges get missed, it doesn't matter because I've shrunk down the design. I find that shrinking my my designs by about 0.25 of an inch is the right amount for me. You're gonna wanna experiment with trial and error for your computer and printer. One tip that I recommend to make sure that when you're accounting for bleed, things still look smooth is that I make sure that the background behind my design, I use the eyedropper tool and put the background in as a color that really closely matches what the design is. So if there is a little bit of the bleed exposed in your print, it just flows right into the card design itself and it's not really noticeable. The printer I use, if you're curious, is an Epson EcoTank 8550 and I absolutely love it. I've had it for about a year and a half and I've had to refill the ink once or twice. Certain colors I've had to fill twice, some colors I've only had to fill once, and it prints incredible quality. I am super happy with it. I haven't had any serious issues with it yet, fingers crossed. It's definitely a pricey printer, but I have absolutely gotten my money's worth at this point. As long as you have a decent photo printer, it should be more than good enough to make greeting cards. The printer I had before this one, I can't remember the name of it right now, but I'll put it on the screen. That one worked great as well. I just wanted something that could handle bigger paper and print in a little bit higher quality. And I really wanted an EcoTank because I have a personal vendetta against printer cartridges. I hate them. Okay, it's time to talk about materials, so I get to tell you about my perfect greeting card paper. It is the 88-pound Polar Matte paper from Red River Paper. It is so dreamy. It's the perfect thickness where you get a nice thick greeting card that can stand up on its own, but the key and what makes it so perfect for greeting cards is that the print quality is still amazing. I went on what felt like a seemingly endless journey to find the right greeting card paper, and I found so many that were a beautiful thickness that felt really good in my hands and were the right amount of quality that I wanted the paper to have. But what most papers lack is that they can't actually hold the level of print quality that my printer can do and what I want my cards to be. What I was using before and what I still use for a lot of my work and for my bookmarks and sometimes my prints and stuff like that is the Photo Matte paper from Staples, which is a 60-pound paper. It works great, but this Red River paper is life-changing. It's exactly what I was looking for. I'm so glad I found it. I actually have an affiliate link with Red River Paper, so if you're looking to get some paper, you can get their amazing paper and help me out a little bit at the same time by following my affiliate link to make your purchase from them. They are based in the States, which is a bit of a downside for those of us who are Canadian and have to pay the exchange rate and the pricier shipping, but I do promise you it is worth it. I am super happy with my paper from them. You can order sample packages to try things out and see what works for you. They have amazing options for paper for all kinds of purposes and shapes, and paper that's already pre-scored, which may be more beneficial for you depending on what your setup looks like. Definitely go check them out. I am super happy with them. They are going to be my go-to paper people indefinitely. So some other materials that are very important to a greeting card making. One thing that I find incredibly helpful but is not completely necessary is a scoreboard. It basically helps make it really easy to carve in crisp lines to make the folds on your greeting cards look really smooth. It's not necessary for folding cards. You can do it with just some kind of bone folder and your own eyes, but personally I find it really levels up the quality of my cards. As I mentioned a moment ago, Red River Paper does offer pre-scored cards. They cost a little bit more, but then you wouldn't have to buy a scoreboard and it saves you a lot of time. Envelopes are another very important material. When you're selling cards, people will just assume that their greeting card is going to come with an envelope, as they should. You shouldn't have to go out and buy a box of envelopes just because you're buying one single card. So for me, the perfect envelope size is 4 3/8 and 5 3/4. You want to make sure that when you're buying your envelope that it's a little bit bigger than your card. I've made the mistake before of buying something that's the exact same size as what I want to put in it, and it needs to be a little bit bigger if you want the thing to fit inside the bigger thing. So make sure you've measured the size of your card or what your cards are going to be and get an envelope that's slightly larger. Another thing that is not a necessity but can sometimes be really helpful with greeting cards, especially depending on the setting you're selling them, is plastic sleeves. So sadly, if you're selling greeting cards in like a shop front, for example, in my experience, that's kind of the standard. You don't very often see cards just alone with an envelope. Depends on the setting though. Some places do have a setup like that. I would personally prefer for it all to be like that, so it could be lower waist. However, I do have some of these sleeves so that I can wrap my cards in sleeves depending on what setting. I've experimented with using sleeves for all of my cards. My little green heart just can't take it. I am trying to eliminate them and use them as little as possible. But when you are a business owner just starting out, you want to do everything you can to try and encourage sales of your products, and unfortunately these little plastic sleeves can really help with that. It makes them look really crisp, really clean. So I do use them sometimes, and you can actually get biodegradable ones, which is what I have. have. I get them from clearbags.ca, but again, same thing, you want to make sure that they're a little bit bigger than your card and your envelope. One last material I will mention that is again not a necessity but extremely helpful is having some kind of paper cutter. I have both they're both Fiskars brand, one of those like ones, I don't know what those are called. It's a paper cutter, and then I have a guillotine style cutter, which I find makes cutting a bunch of cards in a row really streamlined because the guillotine cutter has a spot for me to line up the cards in the same place every time so I can get the same cut really easily. It makes cutting a lot more ergonomic of a process than using the little cutter, but they are not cheap. So what I did was just used the little cheaper cutter for a really long time until I felt like I could justify making the purchase of the guillotine cutter. You can also get by with just scissors. You can also buy your cards in the right size that you're looking for directly from Red River Paper. There are many options. There are many ways to go about it. Let's talk about pricing. Arguably one of the hardest parts about selling anything that you've made, not just greeting cards. I find you have to embrace that it's going to be an ongoing process. You're going to question yourself, you're going to see what other people do, you're going to hear things that make you change your mind, and that's all normal and all part of the process. At the end of the day, what matters is that you are getting paid fairly for the work that you're putting into what you're doing, and you should never change your prices because someone else is pressuring you in whatever way. If customers and markets are telling you that things are too expensive, or someone's telling you you're not selling your cards for enough, you gotta listen to yourself at the end of the day. So the number one thing I recommend is just compare to other people making similar things to what you're making. That's a good starting point, but there are all kinds of different reasons why your price might need to vary from what the standard is. Maybe you're just getting started and you really want to get your work out into the world, so you price things a little bit lower and you're okay with not making as much of a profit margin in the start. That's totally okay. You can do what you need to do. Sometimes people will tell you you're undercutting other people in the business, but it's a personal choice and it's okay. So it might not be helpful depending on whether you live in Canada or not, but I'm going to give you my price breakdown and hopefully that will help you make your decision, or at least give you the factors to look into to help influence what your card price is going to be. I price my cards at $6 because not only does that seem to be the standard for what a handmade, hand-illustrated, hand-printed card is in my area, but I've also done a price breakdown, and I think that part of the reason why it's the standard is because it does make sense once you see all the numbers lined up. So currently I price my greeting cards at $6 Canadian. The main reason for this was that is just what seems to be the standard for similar types of products, but what solidified this decision for me and why I don't increase or decrease my price was based on looking at my price breakdown of what each card costs. This is what my price breakdown is for each card. So the paper ends up costing about $1.60 per sheet, and when you cut that in half per card, you get 80 cents. This number does fluctuate depending on how much in bulk I make my orders, because it does end up costing a little bit less. Price variation comes from the more that I buy in one go, the less that I end up paying for shipping. Envelopes end up working out to about 20 cents because I end up paying about $20 for 100 envelopes. It depends where I order them from and again how much bulk I order at a time. I very roughly calculated ink to be about 40 cents per card. This was really hard to calculate, and it's based roughly on how much I've spent on ink divided by how many pages my printer has printed, which it's able to tell me. Plus I just rounded up a bit to compensate for price of the printer in the first place and potential future repairs and replacements. I also account for the plastic sleeve, which works out to about 20 cents per sleeves, although I only use them sometimes, which means that I end up paying about $1.60 per card, and that's not accounting for any of the time that I've spent on the card. I sell my cards for $6 because of the $6, roughly 30% gets held back for taxes. This is just what I keep for taxes. It's a fairly high number, but I'd rather at the end of the year have extra money set aside for taxes than not enough, which leaves about $4.20 minus the $1.60 from the cost, giving me about $2.60 of profit per card. This might seem like a lot, but there's a lot of other factors to consider as well. For one thing, if I'm selling them wholesale on Fair, which I do, the number is halved. If I'm selling them at a market, or even when I'm selling them on my website, every single product, part of that cost ends up going back into things like table fees and my website fees and all that kind of stuff. I also need to pay for things like display materials for the cards. Right now it's actually a jewelry stand, but I wanted something that would allow me to display the cards vertically on my table, and it's suiting me fine for now. I'm going to need to upgrade to something else soon, so that is also a factor that comes into play when you decide what your price is going to be. At the end of the day, sell your cards for what you think is fair. You know how much work you put into it, you know what it costs you, you know what your priorities are, and it's okay to just choose a price that is the same as what you're seeing other people doing if you don't know. That's what I did to start with, and no matter what you choose for a price, if your cards are well made and authentic and they speak to you, they're going to speak to someone else, and once you find find the right audience, the sales will come. So that is all the tips I have for you. That's everything I can think of about my process. But if I've forgotten anything or if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to leave a comment. I would be more than happy to try and get back to you. I will try my darndest to answer all the comments. I'm usually pretty good about getting to comments. If there are fellow greeting card makers out there, I want to hear your tips. If there's anything that you feel like I missed or that you do differently, I always really appreciate getting to hear other people's ideas and perspectives. Also, please tell me what is the weirdest or funniest thing someone has said about a card that you've made. I have a cute story. I have a lot of cards with birds on them because I'm a huge bird nerd, and one of my birthday cards is a little like ambiguous duck goose character, and the card says happy bird day instead of happy birthday. But one time my aunt bought it for her son because he and his wife were getting a new baby bird, and so she got them happy bird day for their bird day, getting their baby bird. One of my favorite things about making greeting cards is getting to hear how people use them and people's reactions to them. It's just so nice. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope that it gave you what you were looking for. My usual content is more on the side of vlogs and lifestyle kind of videos, but I do love making tutorials. I just want to make them about things that people actually want and actually find helpful. So please leave me a comment if you have any suggestions for tutorial style videos you'd want me to make in the future. I am more than happy to. I just want to know what you want to see. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. There's a lot of content out there and you chose to spend your time watching mine and helping me, and that means the world to me. I hope you have a wonderful day and I will see you in the next video. Bye friends! Where should I put my cup so you can see how cute my mug is? What am I doing with my arms? I don't know. What am I doing with my arms? So first thing, this is hard. Why is this so hard? My perfect paper is. Nope, that's stupid. On the back of a creating.